They say history is written by the winners. And in the case of Native American people on this continent, that has mostly been true until now. Killers of the Flower Moon, which has been on the bestseller list for months, tells a new story. I'm curious, before I go on, how many of you have read Killers of the Flower Moon? You can look around. Thank you. It tells a new story and a very local story. A story about how oil was discovered here in Oklahoma and how that oil made the people who lived here, including members of the Osage Nation, how it made the Osage people very, very rich. And it tells the story of how then local descendants of European immigrants, or what we sometimes call white people, managed to manipulate, marry, and murder their way into gaining control of the assets, the property, and the proceeds from the freshly drilled land. It's this story I planned to talk to you about this morning. So many of you have been telling me about the book and its impact on you. But as we began planning, I realized the story is much bigger than the story told in Killers of the Flower Moon. The story reaches back almost 600 years now to when Europeans first landed on the east coast of this continent. The story's interwoven with how settlers and colonialists claimed the right to own the land they were settling as they spread across the continent. These settler colonialists, I'm learning to call them, breaking every single treaty they made with the leaders of the Indian nations they encountered. Every single treaty. And it's a story we're still living today, which became very clear to me and to David Smith, our director of worship, as we reached out to a few Native American members here at All Souls to help us shape the service this morning. Quickly, pretty quickly, not quickly enough, I realized how naive I'd been and continue to be. I realized how little I know, even though I've read and studied a lot, how little I know about the various nations that live on this continent, or about the Osage people who were here in Oklahoma before the Cherokee came here during the time of removal, as it's called, when the people of the nations in the southeast part of this country were forcibly removed and settled here. And I realized in that awkward way that I do again and again as a white European American, that the story I inherited and learned and live in is not the only story. That there is no universal Native American story or history. That I couldn't invite guests who were Cherokee to participate in this service and then talk only about what happened to the Osage. It's painful sometimes, this waking up to my own whiteness and my Western European ways of thinking. The legacy of colonialism and of our country is as complicated, confusing, and convoluted as it is heroic, hopeful, and humane. And it continues on in each and every one of us today. Part of this Sunday for me is about accepting this, about holding the contradictory stories in tension, not denying either one, but allowing myself to be curious about how colonialism has and still does impact my own consciousness. I will say I'm very grateful that the story in Killers of the Flower Moon has been told and written down, and because we're not talking about it this morning, I need to make apologies to members of my book group who are present here this morning. I would love those of you who are here who have read it to sign up to have a further discussion about it in a book group. I would love to continue the conversation about this very important book, which I think is a must read, truly, for anybody who lives in or near Tulsa. But this morning, I think there are other stories to be told perhaps more important stories to be told, stories that we would never hear unless we actively seek them out. It feels more important to deepen our relationships with people who care about Tulsa and All Souls and what we represent and who we are becoming, because we are part of this living history, as Reverend Marlin said when he talked about the Freedmen's Dinner that happened here last night. We are making history. We are history in the making, as people always have been and will continue to be, but we live in a very interesting place, in a very interesting time in history, right here at the end of the Trail of Tears. So before I introduce you to the Verdi family singers, I want to give our guests a sense of who we are before they share with us who they are. So they might need to turn around and look at you. And I am going to ask you several questions and ask you to raise your hands. So please raise your hand if you are actually from Tulsa or the surrounding areas of Tulsa. Thank you. And then now raise your hand if you're from Oklahoma. And then raise your hand if you're from another state in this United States of America. Thank you. And how about if you identify as someone who comes from outside the United States of America, foreign-born or foreign national? Raise your hands high, even though it's scary. Okay, because there's more than you think. Okay, thank you. And then how about raise your hand, I'm almost done. Raise your hand if you identify as Native American. I think this is important. Keep your hands up high. Knowing that there's lots of questions about identity. Nobody's going to check if you're on the Dawes roll or not this morning. Nobody's going to check. And then how about, it gets a little more personal here, so see if you can be brave. How about if you identify as biracial? Thank you. I see some hands. And bilingual? And last one, binational. Excellent. Thank you, thank you, thank you, everybody. Big hand for all of you. I needed you to feel how much courage that takes, just to raise your hand, because these women who are going to speak with me in front of you today are showing a tremendous amount of courage to talk about the very complicated issues of identity with all of us this morning. So I'd love the Adair family to come forward now. Janelle, Becky, and Susan. And I'm going to ask Janelle 3 questions. Okay. So, Janelle, before you share a song with us, would you tell me a little bit about your family story and how singing is such an integral part of what you do?
Yes, I will. Sio Nagad, means hello everyone. My name is Janelle. This is my sister, Becky Adair. This is our mom. She decided to come with us last night. We're really glad that she came with us. Susan. And then this is my son, Jairus, and he came with us today too. Now, my grandma, my mom's mom, and my grandpa, Chigesa, he's passed away several years gone now, but they would go out to churches, area churches, and sing Cherokee songs. And as my grandparents sang, when my mom and her sisters grew up, this is what they did. They would go out into the churches with them, and they learned these songs with them, just by living them, basically. And so as they grew up, and they're adults now, they sing a lot of their church songs is what they are that have been put into Cherokee language, because the missionaries that came through were very prominent within our communities. They came in and we accepted their religion very easily. And as a matter of fact, some of the missionaries commented on how easy it was to convert Cherokees to Christianity. And one of the main reasons is because the things that they were espousing to us, how we should live, we were already living that way. We may not have called it Christianity, but it was really the bigger group before myself is what it was about. And so with these songs, my mom and them grew up, and me and my sister grew up listening to these as well, almost in the same fashion. We would go to singings with them, and we grew up hearing these songs. And so that's how we became what we still call the Verdi family singers, even though most of them are married and they're not Verdi's anymore. But we've been doing this. There's a lot of elders in the community when they pass away, especially Cherokee elders. Their family requests that they have Cherokee songs sang at their funerals, and so that's what we do. But I think that's, yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit specifically about the song you're about to share with us?
Yes. The first song that we're going to sing is actually called One Drop of Blood. And the song that we're going to sing, it was said on the Trail of Tears during the removal, which was a forced removal, the military actually came in, the U.S. military came in and began escorting Cherokee people out of our homelands, which is in the southeast part of what's now the United States. During this time, a lot of people think the Trail of Tears is just one long trail, but it's not. There were 14 small groups that came across about 2.5 years, 1838 to right around 1840. So these small groups would be gathered up. They'd go out into the communities and gather Cherokee people up. Once they had about 300 to 500 Cherokees gathered in a stockade, which is just an open area with tall walls, they began to move that group of Cherokees from our homelands to right here where we are today in the northeast part of Oklahoma. So these groups that would come across, they didn't all follow the same trail. Some of them came a little bit further north through Missouri. Some of them came further south through Arkansas, what's now Arkansas. But these groups would not always stay directly together in a group because they would be traveling for months. But as the groups would come across, and this time of year is when the first group was actually traveling because they came in the late fall. So they got stuck in one of the biggest snowstorms to that date, and it was very traumatic, and it was very detrimental to that group. But as they came across, sometimes they would spread out a little bit. You know, that group of 300 to 500 would spread out across a little bit of land. In order to keep track of each other, this song was said to be sang, and in the chorus you'll hear it. There's my sister's going to lead this song, and as she leads it, I'll do the follow afterwards. And it's said during the trail that when they would sing this song, they would sing that first call and they would wait to hear the response, that follow-up, so that they would know where that group was, because they might not be able to see them, but they could hear them and they could see how far away they were, just kind of keeping track of each other. So that's when people sing this song, that's what they go back to, the story, you know, where it kind of goes with the Trail of Tears, and just keeping track of each other to know where we were.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ready?
Mm-hmm. Ready.
Kato da jaya dane liji san o ga jeli jaga we you he o gali gali yan ha kwo yen do chila wistane di o ga jeliga jaiga we you he ja jeliga no jaiga
Hi, my name is Donette Rayom. I'm a Native American girl, and today you're about to get schooled.
we've evolved and, not all of us lived in teepees.
Teepees were made for only travel uses.
Well, we own one, but we don't live in it.
We don't live in it.
We just camp in it whenever we want to.
We use them for things like ceremonies or camping and such, but we don't live in them. I have to say to that, where is my check? We really don't get anything for free. Everything we get, we have to work for it just like everybody else. If we had free healthcare, then the diabetes and heart disease rate would be very, very low. But at this point in time, it's very high.
Our dad works to provide for us. We don't get money or anything.
We get schooling for free. That's not true either. We have to meet the same academic requirements as any other ethnicity.
We still have to apply for scholarships.
I thought it was just Donald Trump that didn't pay taxes. If we were rich off of casinos, why would we need government money?
I think that we just mostly lose our money to casinos. We all gamble.
Not all Native Americans wear headdresses. In some tribes, they don't wear them at all.
In my tribe, we don't wear headdresses, and we never did.
Women don't wear headdresses, and you have to earn them.
It wasn't just given to them or handed down to them. You have to earn every feather that makes up that headdress. If you were to buy a headdress, that would be disrespectful because there's no meaning behind it. You didn't do anything to earn it. All you did was pay for it. That's racist. And a lot of people say that the redskin term comes from the color of our skin, but if you look at me, I'm not red.
Society is just played into it like the word redskins is okay when it's not.
The word redskin came about from the scalping of Native Americans. Redskin means the blood that was dripped from down on their faces. That's a major league sports team, and their argument against changing the name would be just like me having a conversation with my mom, and my mom asked me, "Why don't you like Brussels sprouts?" Because I don't.
It's not like we have a mascot that's called White Man.
In a way that's making fun of our culture and who we are, and we're human beings just like everybody else.
Okay, thank you everybody for bearing with us all these transitions. I'd like to introduce Violet Rush to you. She is a friend, she is a law student, she is an activist, and I will let her tell you a little bit about herself in a minute. And we also have Janelle, and we don't have enough time, but we'll do the best we can. So having just watched that film, I thought a good place to start would be to ask about the impact of stereotypes on your lives. Really, and the question I wrote, I think, is worth reading. What would you say has been the impact on you of a stereotypical white person's perception of Native Americans? Who wants to start?
Oh, thank you. CO, my name is Violet Rush, and I am a Cherokee Nation citizen. So, you will probably also notice that I am also white. I identify as biracial because my Indianness and my whiteness equally, have influenced my experience in this world, and I definitely always feel the need to call out that I benefit from white privilege, even though I also have a Native identity. And when talking about white privilege, this actually really influences how stereotypes impact me because if we look at things like mascots, they are typically of these caricatures of Native people with dark skin, and typically they're also based on males. Well, that's definitely not my situation, as you can see, but what has happened to me throughout my life since I was a kid is, my experience with stereotypes is that a lot of times there's not a presumption that I'm Cherokee, and so I'm used to that by now. But once people do find that out, they ask a lot of questions or they make a lot of comments, to my face, and not necessarily knowing that those comments are problematic. So things like, how much Indian blood do you have? Things like, well, you're only sort of Native American, stuff like that, that actually comes up quite a bit. And then, when I'm in white-dominated spaces, people also tend to, I don't know why, but for some reason it really happens a lot, but make really racist comments and racial slurs about Native people, not knowing that I'm Native, and whenever I bring it up, I make sure that they regret it. But and typically the response is, well, I didn't know you were Indian. Well, that's not an apology and that's not an excuse. But to me, those two, even though some of those comments are benign and some of those comments are very malicious, to me they basically represent the same thing, right? Like, white people, non-Indian people, are consistently sort of trying to assess my worth as an Indian person and sort of compare that to some sort of archetype, right, that they have in their mind of like what I should look like, or what kind of home I should have grown up in, and that sort of thing. And that's problematic because to me that's like a very colonial way of thinking, right? It's not an intersectional way of thinking. It's not really recognizing like my full humanity and also the humanity of a lot of other Cherokee Nation citizens who look a lot like me. So I would say that's my experience with stereotypes.
Thank you. Excuse me. So instead of asking you both the same question, which I had planned originally, I'm just gonna, we won't have time to do that. I think I'll just keep going, if that's okay. So I noticed in preparing for this service, even amongst ourselves, and we pride ourselves a little bit on doing this intercultural work and being able to be sensitive, that we weren't sure what words to use. And you just
Your
used,
Majesty is fine.
Yeah. Well, I say that too, but it hasn't caught on here yet. So Native American, Indian, and similar things in our learning about African American white relations. What do we say? So can you give us some guidance on that, or your experience with that?
Yes, and I always preface any questions that I answer. I always kind of tell people, with almost 600 federally recognized tribes, and the Cherokee Nation has 3 federally recognized tribes: United Kituwa Band Cherokee Indians with about 10,000 members, Cherokee Nation with over 360,000 members, and the Eastern Band Cherokees with about 16,000 members. That's a lot of indigenous people. And within those populations, you have people that have a card that says they're a member of that tribe, and that's all they know. And then you have people on the other end of the spectrum that have cultural knowledge. They've grown up with the culture. They know about their ceremonies. They know their languages, and they can walk you through the daily life. They're very identifiable, not just physically, but culturally. And you have everything in between. So when you come across any indigenous populations, it just the luck of the draw, whoever you happen to be talking to. And so I think I usually call people, when I talk about Indian people, I say indigenous populations. And it just kind of covers a wide spectrum of not just indigenous people here on the North American continent, but each continent has indigenous populations everywhere. When I'm hanging out with my mom and my sister, I'll talk about Indians. We call each other Indians. I say, well, there was an Indian girl over there. But I think a lot of it, for me anyway, is intent, the intent that you have when you say something about someone, whether you call them Indian or Native. Because I even have a friend who was Paiute Shoshone, and she came from the Oregon area, and whenever she came to school here in Oklahoma, she used to talk about the skin. She says, where's all the skins at? And it wasn't offensive to me because I knew what she meant by that, and there was no intent behind what she said. said, although, as you saw in the video, they talked about Redskins. If someone that I didn't know and that said it in a way that was offensive, I would definitely be offended by that. But I think a lot of it is intent and kind of knowing where that person is coming from. So.
Thank you. So I'm curious, maybe you both need to answer this, because we were talking before about how difficult it is and how risky it feels, why you're even here, why you want to share your stories with us. Why don't you go first?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, so the question was like, why am I here? Why do I want to
talk about
this?
Okay. Why expose yourself?
Okay,
and talk?
yeah. So
a week and a half before we all celebrate Thanksgiving together.
Right. So, again, back to the whole white privilege thing. I typically really see my role as someone who is here to hold space and create space for Indigenous women of color, Indigenous women who don't directly benefit from white privilege. Like, I sort of see myself in that role, and so typically I wouldn't be up here talking about, Indian stuff, but I did think it was important because I thought it was important to come up here because I think that, as we go through generations, and I have a lot of friends who identify this way as well, like more and more people are becoming biracial, and I have friends who are Norwegian and Black. I have friends who are Syrian, Lebanese, and white. I have friends who are Yaqui, which is a southwestern tribe, and their lands span across Arizona into northern Mexico, and that person is Yaqui and Jewish. And so I think that we are always sort of wrestling with, like, where do we fit in? We have these conflicting identities, and a lot of times I think we consider ourselves like daughters of the colonized and the colonizer, right? So you have these two experiences that conflict with one another, and you're constantly having to leverage them and figure out where you are. And I thought that it was important to come up here and to just be visible, basically, and just sort of, in addition to having the duty to make space for Indigenous women of color, I think I also would be doing a disservice to a lot of biracial folks if I didn't at least make myself visible and didn't sort of expose my vulnerability and, just sort of this, life of constantly having to weigh and balance two conflicting identities.
Thank you. So I would like you to answer that question also, and I wonder if you can't also weave in, because even though your identity is more simple on one level, as a member of the Katua band, looking for the right word there, band. There is also this history that Reverend Marlin mentioned before of Cherokees being slave owners. So also that, being the colonized and the colonizer, the oppressed and the oppressor. I'm curious, just so, why are you here today? What brings you here to talk about this?
Well, Deborah Fritz. A coworker of mine is a member of the congregation here, and she asked if I would be interested in first coming to share some of our songs, and so I said yes. And I enjoy sharing my culture. I truly enjoy this. I'm actually a full-blood United Katua Band Cherokee tribal member, as are my sister, my mom, and my son. And my job is with cultural tourism. I get to work and share my culture and get paid for it. And there's I could not have written this out any better than what it's worked out so far. I'm truly blessed and fortunate to be where I am now, that I get to go out into populations throughout Oklahoma and even beyond and get to share my culture. And so being here today, this is a passion of mine, to be able to come out and to share a true piece of who I am and a true piece of the people that I belong to. You know, these are my people, this is my history, this is my son's history, and this is his culture. And I feel it's a very important to teach others in an accurate way, in a thoughtful way, and in a truthful way. So that's the main reason that I'm here. I love to do this. I love to share all aspects of my culture, especially with audiences that seem to be very willing to learn. That's what I like. And you mentioned the colonization.
Yeah.
Cherokee people, traditionally, we assimilated. They called 5 civilized tribes because we assimilated so quickly. That's why they considered us civilized, because we were willing to adapt to their lifestyle, the Europeans, so fast. And we adapted so quickly and so well that we actually began to adopt some of the ways of the Europeans that were not necessarily how we had believed initially, and we did become slaveholders. Again, some of the very wealthy Cherokees, they were the ones who had the money and became slaveholders and emulated the lifestyle that we were surrounded by. Even our chief, a lot of people don't know this, John Ross, you know, our chief before, during, and after the Trail of Tears was a slaveholder as well. His brother was Lewis Ross, the secretary of the Cherokee people. And one thing that hasn't changed throughout time is that the people that have a lot of money are usually the politicians. And even back then, you know, in the 1800s, that was the same thing, even within the Cherokee Nation. So a lot of our 1%ers that we talk about today that had a lot of money, they were slaveholders, and they brought the slaves over during the removal period. So that is something that is in our history that a lot of people don't know.
So I want to end with a question both about forgiveness and hope before we sing Amazing Grace together. I think these conversations, not just in this congregation, but in the country at large, are just painful and difficult. We know that it's really important to lift up the differences in our cultures and claim our heritage and our history, and learn to be in community in a new way. And speaking as a white Western European, sometimes it's terrifying. It feels like I should just go away, you know? Like I should just go back to France or Lithuania, where my family is from, where I'm not doing any harm to any people. It's real. It's a real pain and question I carry with me. So our theme for this month in this congregation is forgiveness. So I'd love to hear where you think, what role does forgiveness play in this story that we're all living together, and what hope do you have for the future? I think, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I do think a lot of folks tend to carry this sort of like, you know, what do I do now? I know more about colonization. I know more about this history of indigenous people in the United States. Like, what am I supposed to do? Should I go back to, you know, like, I mean, you're from here. You were, you know what I mean? So I definitely, I understand that. And I guess I would just say, you know, my hope is that these types of conversations, these types of spaces will, you know, continue to be created. You know, Native voices will continue to be centered. You know, my background is, you know, a reproductive justice activist. So, you know, I think that, you know, particularly Native women's voices should be centered. But, you know, sort of, you know, playing off of what Janelle was saying, I think there's also, the more you learn, particularly about the history of Southeastern tribes, I think you'll sort of come to understand that, you know, there was quite a bit of assimilation that, you know, was voluntary. And so, you know, we talk a lot about the Trail of Tears, and that was really bad. I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not saying, I'm not sort of deflating the seriousness and the gravity of that act of genocide committed by the US government, but at the same time, I think people need to understand that there were Cherokees over here before that even happened, right? Like all the folks I come from are old settler families, and they were here before the removal. So there was quite a bit of, bargaining and negotiating with white culture beforehand. And, all my old settler families that I come from, they've been mixing with white people for a long time. And, we're the folks who chose to assimilate and that sort of thing. So I think that it complicates things whenever, it further complicates things, but also I don't necessarily think that everyone should be putting the guilt of removal necessarily on themselves. I think a way to help heal what's going on now is just creating these spaces, learning more, and centering Native voices.
Thank you. That helped me. I hope it helps some of you. And, forgiveness and hope, and the distinctions. What I heard a little bit with Violet is that there is a way of claiming our separate identities and the nations and tribes and cultures we come from, and be one human family together.
Okay.
And so forgiveness and hope.
Okay. I think as far as forgiveness goes, I think the fact that there are any indigenous populations and that we still have these songs, we still have our language, we still have our, the things that make us culturally who we are is a miracle in itself. Everything that happened, if you understand what happened to indigenous populations here, just on the North American continent, the fact that we're here is a very big reason to be grateful that we have anything left. And I think teaching my son and knowing myself and continuing to learn about my history and what happened to us as a people and the realness of it, not just the Disney version of things, the Indians were good and the white people were bad. There's a lot of complexities in everything, because you're right, we did assimilate. A lot of us assimilated very willingly. And I think that just within history, it's good to know the truth, and it's good to know what's real to really understand what happened. So I think as far as forgiveness goes, I don't ever go around my life personally thinking, did my ancestors wrong? Probably stole my land. I don't do that. And so, but it's a place of hope. And I think as indigenous people, if we continue to see ourselves as victims and to blame, because you do have to take responsibility for things that have happened as a people, as a whole people. But I don't believe being a victim and saying, this is what happened to my people, and this is why I can't get a job, or this is why I do this, or this is why I do that. I think it starts to fester in your own self. And so I think each of us, no matter what your ethnicity is or your background is, has to come to some type of know who you are, and come to some peace with that, and to have some knowledge about things that happened, and maybe things that happened in your family's background or your ethnicity group that you identify with. I think understanding and learning is one of the biggest steps that you can do. And even if you accept some responsibility for that, this is what happened and this is what my people did. Today, you have a choice on how you choose to interact with each other. We have a choice as to what we choose to be and how we choose to be as human beings, no matter what cultural group you're from. We're really all human. And I think that's how I see it as far as the past. And my hope as an Indigenous woman is that I can teach this culture and learn this culture and live my culture and pass it on to that little boy right there. And hopefully in 20, 30 years, I'll have grandchildren who will know and still will understand and still will be able to speak and still know these stories and know who they came from. And I can only do that with my son and my nephews and my family. And that's my biggest hope, is that they have their identity. They identify not only as human beings, but what's so specific about us as Indigenous people and our tribe and our family history, they know that. Because you have to belong somewhere. Because I think it's a lonely life and you just kind of float through it if you don't feel like you really belong to something. And to me, that's what my culture has fulfilled for me. That's everything. My life, Janelle Adair, truly is a United Kituwa Band woman. And if somebody told me, you can't be that anymore, I don't even know if I would exist. I don't know who I would be or what I would be. So that's my hope, is that we can give that to the generations that are coming up, their identity and their culture, and to belong to us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. How about a big thank you? We're just going to do Amazing Grace. Okay? Yeah. Yep. You guys can go down. Thank you, both of you. We're going to close. The Adair family is going to share Amazing Grace first in Cherokee, and then when they switch into English, it's time for all of us to join in.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Hey, we're so happy you're visiting with us online today. We love connecting with people all across the country and around the world, sharing our powerful message of love beyond belief.
There's something new happening here. You can now join All Souls as a virtual member. Our virtual membership is designed for friends who live outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and who want to engage with All Souls in a meaningful way.
You can be part of an expanding family, a global family really, wherever you are. If you live in Oklahoma,
Ohio,
or Orange County, California,
Canada,
or Cameroon. By becoming a virtual member, you'll be able to deepen your connections with members and friends here in Tulsa and with members wherever you are.
Each week, you'll receive special All Souls content tailored for you, our virtual members. Virtual members have access to pastoral care, to personal prayers, and also receive invitations to exclusive web events.
You can learn more, and if you're ready, you can become a virtual member today by visiting allsoulschurch.org/virtual membership.
We're grateful our ministries are having a positive impact on your life, and we want to share the good news of love beyond belief with more and more people. So no matter what, we need your support to keep this ministry growing and thriving, so please consider making a gift today. You can do so by texting
Love BB for Love Beyond Belief to 73256, or simply visit our website. You are a blessing in our lives. May you be blessed
and be a blessing.